All right, I think we're gonna get started here. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. My name is Justin Park. I host these International Space University Space Cafe events, kind of for the betterment of the community, to teach people more about space. Tonight I'm very excited to have Aaron Oesterle come and talk about his time in the space advocacy arena. For those of you who have not heard of the International Space University, we've been around for several decades now. We have a master's program in Strasbourg, France. We have a summer session program that moves around from country to country. It happens to be in the United States this year. It's being held at Rice University in Houston, Texas. There's also an executive space program. There's one of those actually going on right now in Norway. If you're interested, you can check out the website isunet.edu. I guess I'll let Aaron take the floor and talk about solving big problems in space. Everybody, please put your hands together for Aaron.
Thank you. I know most of you. I want to just do a quick round of introductions for everybody, if you don't mind, Justin.
Sure.
I'm Aaron, as Justin said. I'm the Space Frontier Foundation's policy director. I'm going to sit. For those who don't know, I went through cancer treatments a few years ago, and I have neuropathy, and it screws my feet up. So I'm going to sit.
Is it possible to maybe move your chair over there?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sit you in front
If
of
you stand up, I'll get your seat.
You want to use that one, or you want
One of those is fine.
I'll give you this one. Thanks, you are, sir.
Michael Mailing, Starbridge Venture Capital, Space Frontier Foundation, board member, original founder with Dave Maston at Maston Space Systems.
Jack Corelli with the Planetary Society, Director of Government Relations.
George Curley with the National Space Society and Planetary Society. I do legislative outreach, and then I work in the national security space field.
Hey, I'm Jose Ocasio-Cortez. I help the Space Force. I do a whole bunch of other stuff. That's what I'm doing right now.
My name is Greg Bunkus. I'm an accountant. I work for Citrin Cooperman.
Awesome.
Hey, I'm Vanessa. I work as a Salesforce consultant.
Excellent.
Awesome.
I just figured it'd be easier if we do a quick round of introductions. Anyway, as I said, my name's Aaron Oesterle. I'm with the Space Frontier Foundation, and tonight we're going to talk about solving big problems with space. Quick, little bit of background about myself. I graduated with a degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan, and then I found I was a really bad engineer. I always kid, you don't want me around when you're designing your rocket, you want me around for other things. And I'm currently doing my master's program at University of North Dakota, focusing on space studies. I worked at a company called Polyspace with Jim Muncie, who used to be who got to start working for Newt Gingrich, and then worked for Dana Rohrabacher, and then worked for the committee, for the House committee staff on the space subcommittee, and now I do private consulting for various companies. I became the vice president of that for a while, and then I've also done work for the National Space Society and currently for the Space Frontier Foundation. So I'm going to start off kind of talking about where we are with space. As you probably are aware of, or if you're not aware of, you'll soon be aware of this fact. We're going back to the moon. Huzzah!
Yay.
And we're gonna go back there with the Space Launch System and the Orion capsule and the various commercial lunar landers, and it's gonna be awesome. The question I have is, why? Because it's one of those things of like, it's easy to, for those of us who love space, it's easy to fall in love with what we're doing, but the why we're doing it is actually really important. And so it's kind of, we always tend to, there's a tendency to lose the why because we get enthralled by the technical specs of the vehicle or the, or the inspiration or whatever, but the why is really important. Bill Nelson has an answer for us. China. And for those of you who don't know, that's the China Mars rover that Bill Nelson is holding up. I think that was at some committee hearing. Doesn't matter anyway. But there's this big thing about China's, we're in a Cold War with China, or we're going to be in a Cold War with China, and because of that, we have to go back to the moon. Problem is the American public doesn't agree with this. I'll read this to you people. For those who can't read it, which is probably everybody because it's not the best, this isn't the best setup. No disrespect, Justin, I apologize, I shouldn't have said that.
It's a $90 projector.
The bottom one is send human astronauts to explore the moon. 12% think should be a top priority. Now, that's not to say there isn't value in going to the moon, but only 12% think it's a top priority. If you add in, it should be a priority, but a lower priority, you get a little bit more, you get above 50%, but that's not that good. I stand by my statement. That's not a good place to be if you want to change the world, if you want to do big things, if you want to see going to the moon happen. It's not going to happen when you only have a little bit of support like that. So this is the stark reality as I see it. The NASA budget is currently less than half a percentage point of the entire federal budget. There is not going to be a massive call for increasing the NASA budget. And there's a desire to try and recreate Apollo. However, we're not going to recreate Apollo without a massive budget. The numbers just don't add up. And so, and playing the China's going to the moon card is not having the impact. We can have a whole interesting discussion about whether we're in a Cold War with China, and that's valuable. But the idea that that will drive us back to the moon, I stand by my statement. That's not a real justification. And by the way, if you have questions or comments, feel free to jump in at any point in time. So this raises a new question of again, why are we doing space in general? And it's interesting, if you look at the issues that we face as a nation, there's a lot of big complex issues. Healthcare, crime, poverty, terrorism, climate change. I can go down the list, and it doesn't really matter what your particular hobby horse is. I think we all agree that and it doesn't matter your political persuasion. You can be Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, libertarian, as I like to say, my former boss, the crazy right-winger. Take your pick. We can all agree that the U.S. faces a lot of complicated, big problems. And the reality is that if you look at how governments allocate budget, the more they identify it as a big problem, or it's a big. There's also a lot of lobbyists on it, but it's seen as a big problem. So if they're spending a lot of time on it, it's a big issue. And so it's actually worth noting, many of our space activities do address big issues. Things like weather satellites, remote sensing satellites, spy satellites, communication satellites. All those things are absolutely vital for how we do modern living, And now it's becoming even more integrated in terms of things like Starlink and we can go down the list, but there's a lot of satellites and a lot of those kind of things that are absolutely vital for how we do modern living. But there's something that doesn't address the national need, and it's that stuff. I'd love to get up here and say we love human spaceflight as a nation, and we do all kinds of things, and we're prepared to spend, trillions of dollars on human spaceflight. It's not true, and we can lament that as organizations, as people, and as interested parties, but it's fundamentally not true. It's fundamentally true that human spaceflight does not address a national need. We talk about spin-offs, and and there's the claim of every dollar we invest in human spaceflight delivers a $7 return, which is not true. But the short answer is that stuff does not deliver national needs right now. So it's either got to adjust, or it's going to continue to be this little bit of, we're spending a little bit of money right now, and and that's all we're going to get. And maybe someday, somehow, somewhere, the stars will align and we'll go back to the moon. Probably though, it won't. It won't happen anytime soon. So this is kind of where I started. I started with that thought process, and I started with a thought experiment. And I said, can human spaceflight create value for the average person? Because the moment you do that, it's one of those things of when people start reaching for something, whether it's with their money, their time, their energy, whatever, they're prepared to, they're going to start spending, they're going to start, it creates demand and drive and push towards it. So that was my question. And it's worth noting that when society has something new, whether it's new infrastructure, new resources, and this is historically true, and we'll go into some of the historical examples in a little bit. New infrastructure, new technologies, new whatever. The way you maximize the value is you enable the average citizen to explore and use it. This has two big dynamic. Go ahead, Michael.
What do you mean by average person?
For our purposes, it's the average citizen within the U.S. You can theoretically you can expand that to other countries and other places, but for right now, I'm kind of focused on the average person within the U.S. where, it's the broad swath of society. It's not just the individual. It's whether it's the everything from the Fortune 500 CEO to the people who are cleaning houses and working in the streets and stuff like that.
Because I asked the question because for the first 10 years of the internet, and including the .com bubble and the amount of money people made during and after that, the average American had no exposure to it.
Interesting.
It was 10 years after the internet actually was privatized and I was working in the industry before my mother actually could figure out what it was I did for a living. And finally one day she saw that on the Reynolds, tinfoil thing said Reynolds.com. She calls me up and says, "Is this what you do?" I'm like, "Yeah, Mom, that's what I do." "What is that?" We'll explain it at Thanksgiving. But I would argue that new innovations and new things aren't applicable to the average person until you get over the hump of what we call the adoption curve. That the average person comes later. That what enables it is the unaverage person.
But when you have people who are reaching for, I guess my larger point is when you have a lot of people, and it has to be a large swath of people.
Yes, you need a critical mass, yes. But I think that often the people that are willing to do something new are not the average. That's Malcolm Gladwell and Clayton Christensen and all that kind of stuff. But I get that's why I was asking, was to understand, like, I don't know if you guys realize it, but we are not the average. Like, people in this room, we're weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
The fact that we show up in a room to talk about space means we are not the average.
So anyway, but when you open it up to when you open it up to the users, I guess is the better way to put it. Maybe not necessarily average person, but the users. You allow for experimentation, and experimentation allows for the discovery of new products and new services, and it also allows for developing methods and practices to deliver value to the broader public. So, to your point, Michael, even if it's not something that the average person is aware of, the average person gets value out of it.
Yep.
And the more they're getting value out of it, the more they're going to take part in it.
But try explaining it to them. I think most people think GPS is just magic. It comes out of the phone.
Anyway, the biggest issue in terms of addressing this is identifying and removing barriers to entry for the average person. Barriers can come in many forms, things like policy decisions, funding issues, technology. Again, they run the gamut. It is worth noting that government action or government inaction can frequently address these barriers and enable opportunity creation. Excuse me. And there's some great examples of this stuff. GPS was started as a military system, and it was expensive, and it was strictly for the military. And then the technology got a little cheaper, but more importantly, there was a policy change in the mid-90s where they came in and said, we're going to open it up and we're going to allow civilians to use it. And Jose, you probably remember this better than I do.
Yep.
But or know this better than I do. But if I recall correctly, what it was they turned off some of it for the Gulf War, and then they turned on the disruption a little bit. And am I getting the history correct?
No, you're getting it right.
Okay, good. And GPS has fundamentally changed the way society works, whether it's things like Pokemon Go.
Yes.
I have some friends who are who were big Pokemon Go people.
Well, I think my dad's probably older than all of you guys, and he probably plays more Pokemon Go than everyone in this room combined.
I believe
Um,
Story after that.
It enables new ways to do business, new products, saves time, saves lives. Nowadays, if you're I remember reading an article about how, I want to say it was the Forest Service was getting annoyed at people who would get lost and then call with their cell phones and give their GPS coordinates and say, I'm lost, where do you come find me? And they're like, and they basically people need to better understand how to go out there and work in the woods rather than just getting lost and using their cell phones to find their way home when they call us. There are some other examples of this too. Interstate highway systems, rural electrification, and the internet are other examples. And again, this goes back to you create there's new opportunity. You open it up to large user bases, and you hand it off and see what happens. So this brings me to the space race 2.0, as people like to call it, or the new space race, or take your pick. What it's not about. It's not about going to a specific destination like the moon or Mars. It's not about national pride. It's not about producing the best science. All that stuff can and will happen if we go to space, but it's not about that. It's really about creating value and maximizing the value for a large user base. And the larger the user base, the better off you'll be. So, to put it a different way, in a little less technical language, it's who can create the killer apps of space. It's easy to, and there won't be any one killer app. That's a mistake that people fall into the trap of. They want to say, oh, the killer app will be whatever. Take your pick.
It's like, what's the killer app for the internet?
Yeah, exactly. There is no killer app for the internet.
Well,
the killer app was the internet itself.
What's the first one?
Gambling and adult entertainment.
Thank you. Yes. To the point where they even made a song about it.
They made a song about it.
Yes. It was a puppet-based off-Broadway thing. If you go back and look, it's on YouTube, and it's based on World of Warcraft. The internet is for porn.
Well, that was Avenue Q.
Yes. I mean,
But I was part of the first company that was actually profitable that was not in either of those two categories. And we sold royalty-free and stock photography over the internet to like magazines and photo editors and things like that. People were looking for those things, and it was profitable.
So what's driving this Space Race 2.0? It's money. It's who can return on investment on it's money, return on investment, all those kinds of things. If you think it's anything else, you're barking up the wrong tree. This doesn't say that nation states aren't going to take their positions on these things. They absolutely are. But in doing so, they're going to do so because they're getting value for their citizens from it. They're not going to just do it because it looks cool. They're going to have to provide real value to people for human spaceflight. What we should do about it. I want to stipulate up front, this presentation is not a call for unfettered capitalism in space. I will stipulate this up front. I'm a Democrat. I have friends who are Republicans, and I get along with them just fine. I have friends who are libertarians. And I get along with them pretty good. I have some friends who I get along with who are Greens, which I always find weird. But that's me, nothing else. There are real issues and in the world that the space enterprise requires regulation. And I know there was a little bit of discussion early on between Michael and George about orbital debris. That's a real problem. That will require regulation of some kind. How we define that, how we make that happen, I don't know. There's also things in terms of like property rights requires real regulations. Again, don't know. I don't have the answer of how you do it, but stuff like that. I will say regulation by imagination is an error, and I'm cribbing that from Michael here, who I heard him use it a different time earlier today, or was it yesterday? Doesn't matter.
It's all a blur.
Yeah.
What do you mean by regulation by imagination?
So there's we don't know a lot about doing stuff in space.
Mm-hmm.
We've had one space station. I would argue that one data point is not enough to really determine how you regulate a space station.
Yeah, I agree.
There are things that we're going to put in place in terms of like if the federal government is buying a space station or renting a space station, that is all handled by contract law. There's no need to step in and say everybody has to live by this at this stage in the game.
Yeah,
I'll give you a good example. Did you watch The Expanse?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In The Expanse, one of the fundamental premises in the first 3-4 seasons was there was a group of people called belters. They were actually sent out to mine ice water from the outer planets and bring it back to Earth. And so it was essentially a lower class. They were mistreated and everything. In various instances on the Hill, talking to serious space policy staffers and other situations, people kind of cited that. It's like, how do I prevent the expanse from happening? Like, it's a TV show. When we actually do go out in space and we're talking about extracting resources, we're absolutely not going to be using the most ornery, expensive, energy-hungry piece of equipment, e.g. a human being, to do that when the terrestrial mining industry is already rapidly automating and removing people from the mining industry already.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we get regulation by imagination. Someone reading some bad science fiction or hearing some clickbait article on BuzzFeed or something like that, and they're like, oh, we got to make sure we got a regulation. But no. Wait until you actually have evidence that a problem exists.
Exactly, yeah. And context.
And until you actually have consensus around a possible solution. And that's what we're running into right now. One of the things that we heard repeatedly over the past year was, yeah, but how do I prevent bad things from happening? And that was the challenge. There's a lot of media out there for what was the 2 asteroid movies?
Armageddon, Deep Impact.
Yeah.
Thank you. Those 2 movies are why on that list that asteroid, planetary defense is number 1.
Yeah.
Because everybody thinks that asteroids are going to come kill them like next Thursday.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we want to say, make it evidence-based, policy-based, and where there's discussions about what the solutions are and get to that. And so we there is a lot of regulation by imagination. It's the context.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Anyway, so this speech is kind of a clarion call for rethinking how we do the U.S. space enterprise, specifically the human space enterprise, and to build it around value creation. Some ideas for value creation that we could do as a nation. First of all, building markets, not hardware. Let's get out of the hardware business altogether if we can. And there are times and places where we can't, and I get that. And I'm not saying we'll never build hardware, but by and large, there's a lot of hardware stuff that we don't need to be building, that we don't need to operate or control. The best example of this is the SLS, and I will stand by that statement. I will. There's no need nor value coming from the SLS beyond employing a specific segment of aerospace workers whose job it is, who know how to build this particular rocket, and that's the truth. The flip side of that is what's happened with the launch industry. Whether you look at things like, Starship, Radian 1, the Nova from Stoke Aerospace, and Neutron, and just there's countless others out there for the launch industry. We can take advantage of that and save a lot of money and invest it in other things that produce better value.
Not just save a lot, make a lot.
I will accept your friendly amendment, good sir, as they say. Number 2, don't shortchange low Earth orbit. It's easy to talk about wanting to go to the moon and the value of going to the moon or going to Mars or asteroids or what have you. But there's a lot happening in low Earth orbit, and if we forget about that, we lose out. Because, I firmly believe that the big interesting things that will come out of the space industry and the human space industry is going to be related to the private space station market, because you'll have experimenters, you'll have users, and they'll do different things with it. At the same time, I would also say find a way to use ISS and not simply deorbit it. That's just, I'm sorry, this is another one of those things that's just incredibly stupid. You have this great piece of hardware, and some of it can't be reused, and I get that, but there's also a lot of, again, why would you get rid of a giant piece of infrastructure when you can use it elsewhere? Maybe you can boost it to a higher orbit, maybe you can boost it to a Lagrange point, maybe there's a way to recapture some of the modules, I don't know, but the idea of we're just going to burn it up in the atmosphere is, the environmentalist in me cries, and the user in me cries. So let's figure out a better way ahead. And then finally, let's start looking at ways to use space to address big problems. The classic example of this is space solar power, but you don't go assuming that it's the only one or that it's going to work. We've had interesting discussions about space solar power within the organization, but it could not. There's a bunch of reasons it might not work, but regardless, if you're looking for solving big problems with space, you start building the use case for it. So whether it's space solar power or something else, look for those big point solutions. And then finally, we need to normalize the idea of large scale space development, space summit happening for everyone. don't assume space is not there for the for the elite or for space flight is not there for the elite. It's not there for just for the rich. It's not there for just any particular. It's there for everybody. And the more we follow those kind of guidelines, we're going to create a large value chain and a lot of value for going to space. Anyway, that's my story. I'm opening up for questions and discussion. Go ahead,
I'll
Justin.
open it up. I'll play the devil's advocate or steelman aside for deorbiting the International Space Station. It's old, it's breaking apart. It's not even really international, right? India and China are on it. It's kind of almost, the name itself is like a lie. Isn't it time to finally bring it down?
If your argument is that there are better and cheaper versions of it, yes, there are. If your argument is that that's a great big piece of usable material, and if nothing else, let's strip it for parts. Literally, if there's nothing else out there, let's strip it for parts and figure out a way to use, recapture some of this stuff. It might not all be recapturable, but that's quality aluminum, if nothing else.
Just an insider's view, because I'm an investor in both Axiom and Voyager. All of the CLD companies already have dibs on certain things, and a large amount of what you see inside the station, at least on the US segment, those components end up going to the racks and the equipment inside for doing experiments and stuff. A lot of that does end up going to the NASA segments within the 2.5 CLD companies, and so some of that goes. Some of the modules go, for example, also Japan is working with some of the CLD companies on deciding where that external, the porch goes. So there are pieces of ISS that where the countries that own them still are getting value out of them. They're already in discussions for moving those over to one or more CLD providers. It's the modules themselves. As when we first made our investment in Axiom, I asked Mike, why does he think he can run a commercial station when he's run a government station for 10 years? And his answer was, is because now we know exactly what not to do. And there's the modules themselves, for example, all the cooling and stuff is run inside the station. And so it's also, just for coolant tubes, they have in-canal wrapped coaxial tubes for running coolant fluid, which is ammonia. When, at least from Axiom's standpoint, water through nylon tubes you can get at Home Depot are perfectly fine. So there's a lot of, I think the statement was, the ISS was designed to figure out how to design a station. So there's a whole bunch of experiments inside of it. And I think that one of the things we're going to find is the equipment that's on the ISS is going to be reused in the CLD stations. But the core system, with the exception of the actual solar panels, the new ones that Redwire put up there, I think those are going to get reused. But the core modules themselves, everybody's going to end of life. So yeah, you're going to get recycling and reusability, but not on everything. So just the insider view. How many people in the room would actually go if you could afford it?
Yeah.
Safe too.
Whatever.
Okay.
Very safe.
How many would go if you could afford it if it involved never coming back?
I mean, what are we staying for? I think that's
Sorry?
important. What would we
Let's say
would we
go-
be staying
Why
for?
would
I
you stay
mean,
there?
like
Going to Mars and as a settler.
I know, but like would I be the first one or would I be somebody who reads
I think
the
that-
Google reviews?
I'm pretty sure that SpaceX. I'm pretty sure SpaceX would put out to bid on who wanted to be the first human to step off on Mars, and that would be a very large check.
Yeah, but how are you gonna use the check if you're in Mars? Right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is the person who wants to do it is going to stroke a very large check to SpaceX to say, I want to be the first human being to step on Mars.
Oh, I see.
Right.
We don't have to worry about it, I think, in this room.
That's what I mean. That's what I'm saying is you're not going to be the first. You're going to be the 50th.
At least.
At least, I guess.
Yeah, we need to
There are
wait
so
for the
many
reviews.
billionaires, right?
Exactly. It's a little
Well, it may be billionaires, but it's also going to be people that have specialized knowledge about how to make sure that the people. Because if you go to Mars, you're staying there for 2 years, whether you like it or not.
Really?
Right. So there's some people that are going to go there because of their skill sets too. So no, so you know the kind of the point of going to Mars is you probably are not coming back. I don't know, actually, I wouldn't go to Mars. I'd go to the moon first.
See?
Yeah.
No, I'm a very you're very familiar with the term O'Neillian. Okay. Gerard K. O'Neill, 1970s astrophysicist, posited the question of, is the surface of the planet the appropriate place to build a technological civilization? And I think it should be in orbit. And the moon has a large amount of resources that we can use to build those. And I actually think you can make a lot of money doing that. So that's why I choose the moon instead of Mars. I don't want to spend that much money getting out of Earth's orbit just to drop myself down at the bottom of another gravity well that's just as hard to get out of.
What resources does the moon have?
Aluminum, pretty much everything except oxygen, except hydrogen and nitrogen, and some carbon.
But we don't know exactly how much.
We don't know exactly how much, right?
Yeah, so
Mhm.
there's stuff there, but we don't know.
Well, we don't know how much is on
We also
Earth.
don't know really what's below the
It's not
surface.
getting too
There you go.
We love cheese.
Right. It's like if a comet has hit the moon somewhere on the far side and it's buried under regolith, it's hard to detect, so you don't.
Other comments and questions, or I can open it up. I can throw out some questions for us to discuss if people want that. Go ahead, Justin.
I have another question, kind of related to two of your slides about value and about the average person, that kind of relates back to cultural value that people derive from religion and spirituality. The average person in America is spiritual or religious. A lot of people still go to church every week. I was wondering what your opinions are about doing things of the spiritual nature in space. Is that something that's inspiring, that's going to create cultural value that we might have missed, or that the space community has overlooked and
I think there's some truth to that, actually. I think there will be a lot of cultural things. Some of them will be beautiful and wonderful, and some of them will be weird. I still think that there's going to be an interesting market for the first pro wrestling in space. But nonetheless, that will be of the weird variety. But you can make a strong argument that pro wrestling is an art. And
The two companies that have bid to build entertainment complexes on the CLD stations got their start doing mixed martial arts and zero-G on
Fantastic.
Rush It and Vomit Comments.
I was just gonna say vomit comments. Like, why haven't they done that?
No, they've done it.
Have they
And-
televised it live from a vomit comment?
You can, I think they're actually on the internet. They are absolutely hilarious but fascinating because you can tell they've trained. This is MMA. They will land punches and do moves that you can tell they've practiced on, and then they get into these situations where there's zero gravity. They're like, wait, what? And it goes from, damn, that was cool, to that's freaking hilarious.
Yeah, because like with martial arts, so much of it is about manipulating body weight.
Right.
You take out what might be the most important.
No,
one.
but
Well, you still got the
but weight
mass,
is-
you still have to manipulate the mass.
True.
Yeah.
So it's just a
momentum.
different,
Right.
yeah.
And so that's the thing, is they would get in these situations where, because they were pushing against each other, that was natural to them. But as soon as they tried to push against something else and there was nothing there to push against, that's when it got like, I'm swimming in the middle of the thing and I can't get to the other guy, and they're both sitting there trying to, and they're like 5 feet apart, and they can't get to the other person, so they're sitting there just floating around. So yeah, it's hilarious like that. If you've Ender's Game,
Yeah,
the movie, that's
you're
the
right.
same kind of thing with that. So
But there will be, to your point, Justin, there will be cultural significant events that drive us out there, and I think that has value. It's just a question of who can do it and how they can do it and that kind of a thing.
as Guardians.
Yes.
Yeah, I know, I know.
What time is it? Just out of curiosity. 7:15.
Yes, well, actually, we kind of fit the format. If we don't have any other questions, we can kind of finish and just kind of network too. Usually, there's about 20 minutes, 30 minutes presentation and 20 minutes of questions, which we kind of check the boxes on. Any more
Thank you, sir.
questions? All right, well, one more round of applause for Eric.
Yeah, absolutely.